In Vero Beach, Florida, police respond to a 911 call and surround a local home. In the garage, they find a pool of blood and a victim of a brutal attack.
The state of emotions quickly changed. At that point in time, we knew we had something very serious.
Before long, detectives realized they're dealing with a string of gruesome abductions, rapes, and murders.
I knew that it would be a matter of time before he got hungry and started his routine again.
It was a horrible case. Still stands as the worst case I've heard of.
Across the United States, as many as 2,000 people are reported missing every day. Most times, the person in question turns up unharmed, much to their loved ones' relief. But on rare occasions, people are lost forever, the victims of abduction, assault, and murder. 1981, Vero Beach, Florida, a resort community on the Atlantic coast. Situated amidst acres and acres of orange groves, the town is known for its peaceful and laid-back atmosphere.
Well, the crime rate here was below normal. Probably most of our cases were drug cases and, you know, your regular Saturday night brawls. Very few murders.
Originally from Taiwan, the Lings are newcomers to Vero Beach. 57-year-old Pu Ling works as an inspector at a fruit packing factory.
Mr. Ling originally came alone to set up the family here in Vero Beach. So he was here for quite a while and was probably more acclimated to the American culture. And then later his wife and son and daughter came to Vero. They came from Taiwan to you know, a different country, different culture. It was a big adjustment period for them.
February 19th, 1981, 2:45 p.m. Pu Ling heads to work, where he's scheduled for an evening shift. After he leaves, his wife, Sheng Wang Ling, awaits the return of her children from school. 3 p.m., 17-year-old Ying Hua Ling follows her normal routine, riding the school bus home. At some point, a vehicle approaches and her routine day takes a fateful turn. 4 p.m., 12-year-old Su Tao Ling makes his way home from his school. Though the front door's been left open, calls to both his mother and sister go unanswered.
His mother had just arrived from Taiwan, so he thought that she may have been out walking or in the groves nearby. After a while, with them not returning, then he'd become worried.
He spent several hours around there not knowing what to do. That night, when they still had, no one had returned, he finally went to a neighbor.
The neighbor tracks down Su Tao's father at work. Detectives soon arrive and launch an investigation. There's zero indication that the mother and daughter planned to leave the house for an extended period of time.
Mrs. Ling's purse, all of her luggage, personal items were all still in the house. The daughter's book bag was right next to the front door. Right inside the door was a vacuum cleaner that was still plugged into the wall and right in the middle of the room, as if someone was vacuuming them in and they were just walked out of the house or taken out of the house.
We all helped search for them. We had no idea where they went. We figured that there was something drastically wrong, that something happened to them.
Crime scene investigators process the home for clues and document everything. While there are no signs of a struggle inside, possible drag marks in the driveway could point to a forcible abduction. Missing persons reports are circulated to police departments across the state, but no one has seen the Lings. Days turn into weeks, and detectives still don't have a single lead.
To just totally go missing and not be found, that would be an uncommon situation here in our area.
July 15th, 1981. A few months after the Lings vanished, 35-year-old Judy K. Daly is busy packing up for a day trip to the beach. She's given her daughters permission to meet some friends on their own.
They wanted to go to one of the local beaches there in the city where all the kids hang out, and obviously, so she dropped them off there and told them that she would pick them back up at a certain time that afternoon. Then she went on down to another public beach away from the mainstream.
While Judy enjoys her solitude, a figure watches her from afar before quietly approaching her parked car and popping the hood.
She was on the beach area, started watching her clock, thought it was about time to pick her daughter up, went up to her car and went to start her car, and the car wouldn't start.
That afternoon, Judy fails to pick up her children and is reported missing. When police find her car, they notice the engine has been disabled and fear for the worst.
We felt very strongly that something was wrong. This wasn't somebody that had just left on their own accord.
There's no sign of a struggle. It's like she vanished into thin air.
All her beach equipment was there in the car, and similar to the way the Lings were taken from the scene, with all their personal items there inside the house. We have someone missing, and looked like they were just taken from a location.
Crime scene investigators process the car for clues, but fail to turn up a single shred of evidence.
We started investigating, and we started interviewing a lot of beachgoers.
I remember we spent an awful lot of time looking for her, walking some of the areas over there where the underbrush and trails and roads led either to the ocean or to the river, trying to find any sign of her.
News of Kathy's disappearance shocks Vero Beach. In just a few short months, 2 mothers and a high school girl have disappeared in broad daylight.
A small community, very close-knit community. A lot of people were very uneasy.
Before long, a fresh lead will come in and terror will spread as residents come to realize this peaceful resort community is now the hunting grounds of a homegrown serial killer. July 1981, police in Vero Beach, Florida are investigating 2 different missing persons cases. Sheng Huang Ling and her 17-year-old daughter mysteriously vanished from their home. Judy K. Daly disappeared while sunbathing at a nearby beach.
At that point now, the Ling case, that was about 6 months previous to Judy K. Daly. We suspected foul play in that case, so we're also looking at a possible connection between the Ling case and the Daly case now.
Still searching for the 3 missing women, detectives uncover their first potential lead. It involves a bizarre incident that took place not far from where Judy K. Daly disappeared. Just 1 month earlier, an 18-year-old girl is pulled over by a sheriff's deputy. He informs her of a recent robbery in the area and says she's a suspect. Although the girl insists she's committed no crime, the officer explains that her vehicle is a perfect match for one spotted at the scene.
The deputy told her that he wanted her to go back to the area to try to be identified by witnesses.
The girl is suspicious, but does as she's told, following behind. But they're heading farther and farther away from town.
She became very concerned. She thought she was going back to be ID'd as possibly be involved in a crime, and all of a sudden they turn off on a dirt road and end up in a very isolated area.
The road ends near a river, and the deputy seems surprised to find fishermen there.
He became panicked, and she became very, very uneasy when this happened. His whole demeanor had changed, and now he acted very scared and sweating and nervous and wanted her to get out of there. Gave her her driver's license back and told her that the witnesses that were supposed to identify her as part of the robbery were not there, that she could go ahead and return home.
Later that day, the young woman and her father pay a visit to the sheriff's department to report the bizarre encounter.
They come in the office and took a statement. She was very, very shaken up and very rattled.
The sergeant shows her photographs of the deputies in the department. She quickly IDs the man who stopped her. He is 27-year-old David Gore. Married with 2 young sons, Gore usually works maintenance in the orange groves around town. But he also volunteers as an auxiliary deputy with the sheriff's department. He's not authorized to pull people over without another officer present. Furthermore, his story about the robbery was a lie.
When he was called in and interviewed, he didn't really have a good reason for stopping her. He didn't have a really good reason for not communicating with a 911 system that he had stopped anyone, and didn't have a good reason for taking her down an isolated road.
Gore is stripped of his badge, but now, 1 month later, with Judy K. Daly disappearing along the same stretch of road, his name comes up again. Adding to suspicions, investigators learn that Gore has been spotted regularly at the same beach where Daly was sunbathing.
We questioned him, of course, denied, said he knew nothing about it. He said, yeah, I was at the beach. And he says, I go check the water all the time, see what the waves are, what it looks like.
A closer look into Gore's background reveals another alarming incident. 4 years earlier, a woman accused David Gore and his cousin of taking her into an orange grove and raping her. Though neither man was convicted, detectives now see a potential connection to their current string of abductions. Suspicions about Gore are about to grow even deeper. July 21st, 1981. Just over a week after Judy K. Daly's disappearance, a 23-year-old woman is leaving a Vero Beach medical complex.
As she was walking up to her car, she seen what appeared to be some kind of a movement in the back seat of her vehicle.
When she saw this, she screamed.
Appeared that someone was in there.
It just so happened one of the sheriff's deputies was also coming out of the building About the same time, I heard her scream.
She went with him over to her vehicle, pointed out her vehicle. He also observed that there was someone in the back seat of the car, told him to come out. He didn't come out at that time. He pulled his weapon, drew his weapon, and ordered the person out of the car.
Get out of the car now.
A few seconds later, the mystery man emerges. It is none other than David Alan Gore.
He had no shirt on. He had a drink in his hand, a mixed drink. It had alcohol in it.
In Gore's possession, police find a gun and a pair of handcuffs.
He had things with him that would lead us to believe that he was going to abduct her.
But Gore has an explanation. He says he was secretly following his estranged wife and son, who had an appointment at the medical complex.
My wife was supposed to be here with my son. I was just, here to keep an eye on her, but I didn't want her to see me, so she pulled in the parking lot, so I just got in this car and was hiding.
The officer isn't buying it, especially not with the weapons and handcuffs.
He didn't put a lot of faith in what he had said. He went ahead and placed him in the back of the car, arrested him, took him in the office. They had contacted his ex-wife, and she said that she had no appointment at all to be at the doctor's clinic or to have the son there for any kind of a treatment.
Gore is convicted of armed trespassing and given a short prison sentence with a chance at parole after 1 year. Though investigators still have no evidence tying him to the recent missing persons cases, he has now moved from person of interest to prime suspect. But the clock is ticking. If detectives are right about him, he will soon be free to strike again. And if they're wrong, a dangerous predator is still at large. November 1981. In Vero Beach, Florida, 3 women have vanished under mysterious circumstances. The prime suspect is a former auxiliary deputy with the Sheriff's Department, 28-year-old David Alan Gore. Now that he's in custody for armed trespassing, more unsettling stories emerge.
When David Gore got arrested, we got some phone calls from a couple girls, and we went out to their businesses and we interviewed them together. And they would come out from the beach and find their car disabled. And all of a sudden, David Gore would walk out or walk up to their vehicle and he would show them a badge. He says, well, I'm a deputy sheriff. He said, I'll be glad to take you to go get some help.
Though the women turned down Gore's offer, detectives suspect this is likely the same tactic used on missing woman Judy K. Daly. If they're right, they need to find hard evidence against Gore before he's back out on the street. Officers get a search warrant for the vehicle Gore used at his job in the orange groves. At the Regional Crime Lab, a forensic expert searches the vehicle from top to bottom.
We're going to start with photographs. Photograph everything in every angle that we can, using whatever lighting we can to make sure that everything is illuminated. From there, you're going to go through and look for obvious items.
They don't find any blood or fingerprint evidence, but a potential clue turns up in the console.
Where there's a radio underneath the dashboard, like a two-way radio, and they found 2 hairs that were stuck in the little bracket that holds the radio.
DNA testing is not yet available, but experts can compare the hairs with samples taken from the missing women's hairbrushes. Remarkably, the strands found in David Gore's truck appear to be a perfect match for Sheng Huang Ling and her 17-year-old daughter. But without a body or proof of wrongdoing, this evidence is hardly enough for an arrest. Meantime, detectives start questioning Gore's friends and family, looking for any new leads. One of the people they talk to is Gore's charismatic cousin, Fred Waterfield. Though the men have very different personalities, they've shared a close bond since childhood.
His cousin was a year or two older, very popular in school, was very athletic, was on the football team.
He would just talk like he was astonished and everything that David had gotten caught in the back of a car, astonished with what David had done and with the pattern that David had turned out.
But Gore's estranged wife isn't quite so surprised. In light of David's arrest, she remembers something weird that happened right around the time of Judy K. Daly's disappearance.
She said that he'd come home that one day, walked in the house, and when he walked in, he had blood on his shirt. And she had questioned him about the origin of the blood and how it happened, and he said that he was out hunting, shot an animal, and there was, that's how he got blood on his shirt. Kind of fluffed it off.
In March of 1983, David Gore is released from prison, having served his short sentence for armed trespassing. With no evidence tying him to the missing women, police are powerless to keep him behind bars. They do keep him under constant watch.
Well, we kept a tight surveillance on the house right after his release. He was released to his parents. He was living with his parents.
But the surveillance is short-lived.
His mother, like I say, he lived with his parents, filed several complaints against me that I was harassing her son. Since I couldn't arrest him, then they did not want me near him. So I was asked to back off, and it's like a restraining order, you know, to keep me away from him.
David Gore now has more freedom to move around unmonitored.
I knew that it would be a matter of time before he got hungry and started his routine again.
July 1983. Summer vacation is well underway. Like many of her classmates, Lynn Elliott is enjoying the warm weather and the time off from school.
A normal 17-year-old high school teenager. Very well liked by her friends. Lynn Elliott lived on the beach with her family.
We were the only house down there, and we had our own little paradise down there. It was just a beautiful place to live. We had our own boat. Kids could swim when they wanted to. It was a beautiful family. It really was. She was my only daughter. At that time, I owned a TV repair shop. She used to work for me in the TV shop part-time. Go to the beach. That was one of our most favorite things, you know?
July 26th. Temperatures are soaring as Lynn Elliott hooks up with her 14-year-old friend, Reagan Martin. They want to hang out at a popular beach a short drive away, so they decide to hitchhike.
That was the first time they ever tried it. It's just a lark. It was something to do. If I'd have known about it, I would have stopped her, but you know, kids are trusting. They really are.
Before long, a vehicle pulls over to give them a ride. 3 p.m., back in Vero Beach, a boy is riding through a residential neighborhood when he suddenly hears screams and a gunshot. Seconds later, he sees a blindfolded woman headed for the main road, a man in close pursuit.
Both of them were running down the driveway. He fired one shot. She fell by the side of the driveway. He saw him walk up, stand over, and take his gun and shoot her again, and then try to drive her back to the house.
Detective Sergeant Phil Redstone is in his car when the attack is reported over his radio.
Right then, I just had a funny feeling of what the address was going to be.
Turns out, the shooting took place directly outside the home of David Gore.
I mean, my worst fears come to light that we're going to have another case.
July 26, 1983. In Vero Beach, Florida, police respond to a 911 call in a residential area. A boy witnessed a shooting right outside the home of David Gore, the prime suspect in the disappearance of 3 local women. Investigators may be short on evidence, but they're long on suspicion, and they fear what Gore will do next.
Initially, myself and 2 uniformed patrol officers were the first ones to arrive shortly after we got the call. Went in down to the driveway, set up in front of the house, called some additional units to set up a perimeter around the house.
As police look for any sign of movement, another 911 call comes in. A second local resident has also seen a man chasing a woman, but this time a full 4 blocks east of the Gore home. A few officers pull away to follow the fresh lead, only to learn a few seconds later they've been duped.
But we didn't get very far before the dispatch was able to determine that the additional call sending us east was actually coming from back where we had just come from.
He saw the police there. He was trying to divert the police away from his house so he could escape.
Officers are determined not to let that happen. With Gore now trapped inside his home, they're now facing a dangerous standoff.
We were riding along there with the windows down and trying to listen for anybody screaming, any gunshots.
We tried to make contact with Gore inside the house to try to get him to come out. Yeah, we tried calling back on the telephone. We used a loudspeaker from the patrol cars. And we tried knocking on the door. We couldn't get him to respond to us at all.
In the garage, police notice fresh skid marks. And nearby, something more alarming.
I just got down looking at the tire marks, and in the tire marks was a little small pool of blood. As I sat there watching it, I saw a drop fall from the trunk. At that point in time, I yelled out to the other officers, what I'd seen. And at that point in time, we pried the trunk open, literally forced it open. Once the trunk was open, there was a young female inside.
It's the body of 17-year-old Lynn Elliott, picked up off the highway just 2 hours earlier.
It was really an unnerving sight. I immediately checked to see if we could find a pulse, hoping that she was still alive, and didn't find a pulse. Knew that she was dead.
Her hands were bound behind her back, and she had a blindfold over her head. The state of emotions quickly changed. At that point in time, we knew we had something very serious. A shotgun started coming out of the trunk. Emotions started becoming charged.
With daylight fading, police finally make their move.
We forced our way into one of the door, sent officers in to secure the rooms. Once the entire interior of the house was secured, we heard a noise coming from the ceiling. Yelled into the attic for whoever was in there to come out. After a couple times, David Gore said that he was coming out. He'd come out at that point in time, and he was taken into custody.
Also in the attic, police find Lynn Elliott's 14-year-old friend Reagan bound and in shock, but still alive. Forensics expert David Cuddy moves into the Gore home to document the scene and help in the search for evidence.
The whole area outside, from all perspectives, was photographed. Went into the residence and photographed areas they had been involved in, the access to the attic, and areas that he had held the girls in that they knew about, and of course the vehicle and Lynn Elliott's body.
Investigators soon find what appears to be the murder weapon.
Underneath one of the cushions of the couch, we had found a handgun. From the condition of the handgun, it appeared that it had been recently fired.
Across town, an officer breaks the news to Lynn's parents.
And when the guy came to my house to tell me all about it, tell me that she was dead, and it was chaos. Just couldn't believe it. This is really happening to me, you know? Couldn't believe it.
Lynn was raised, and she was raised with values, and she was always taught that not everybody is a good person. And she made a wrong decision, and it cost her her life.
Back at the station, a picture of the day's tragic events becomes clearer. Reagan explains how Gore picked her and Lynn up and took them back to his house at gunpoint. They were then sexually assaulted before Lynn's desperate attempt to escape. And there's a stunning revelation. David Gore wasn't acting alone. When pressed, Gore reveals that the man in question is none other than his own cousin, Fred Waterfield. Gore explains that Waterfield left the house shortly before officers arrived.
That was the first time that we knew of his involvement in anything.
Waterfield is hauled into the station for questioning.
There was something in his demeanor that looked worried as we drove to the detective division.
Reagan identifies Gore and Waterfield as the two men who abducted and assaulted her and her friend. At the same time, the boy who witnessed Lynn's shooting singles out Gore as the man who pulled the trigger. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. As police are about to find out, the terror these cousins inflicted stretches far beyond Vero Beach. July 27, 1983. In Vero Beach, Florida, police have arrested David Alan Gore and his cousin Fred Waterfield for the abduction and murder of 17-year-old Lynn Elliott and the attack on her 14-year-old friend, Reagan Martin. News of the crime rattles the resort community.
That sent a shockwave through Vero Beach. Both had been raped. It's likely that the second one would have died if the police hadn't gotten there when they did.
Though both men deny involvement with the other missing women, Gore soon starts to crumble.
He knew we were seeking the death penalty in the Elliott case, and we suspected he was involved in 3, 4, 5, we didn't know how many other deaths. And his lawyer came in and said, if he leads you to where the other bodies are and admits to the killing of those girls, will you not seek the death penalty on those cases? So naturally we agreed to that because we already had one, was a strong death penalty case.
Sometimes you have to deal with the devil.
Through a series of confessions, Gore reveals the brutal truth behind a number of unsolved disappearances, identifying cousin Fred Waterfield as his long-standing partner in crime. He admits to stalking 17-year-old Ying Hua Ling before finally abducting both her and her mother.
He had his police badge with him, and he convinced her that she was in trouble, and he wanted to take her to her house and explain the situation to her. And when he got there, he found that her mother was there, and so he ended up kidnapping both. And as he was leaving their house, he got on a phone and called his cousin, Fred Waterfield, and said, "I've got some for you."
According to Gore, the motive was sexual. The women were taken to a nearby orange grove where both he and his cousin raped, then murdered them. Gore alleges that Waterfield was actually the instigator, even paying him a cash bounty for each woman he managed to abduct.
He was supposedly the mastermind behind this, according to David, that he would prompt David to do these kidnappings and abductions.
As suspected, Gore was the one who disabled Judy K. Daly's engine and waited for her to return from the beach so he could offer her a ride.
So he's able to get her in the car, started heading up the road, and pulled a gun on her, handcuffed her, and took her out to an isolated area west of town in the Grove area.
Gore also confesses that shortly after his release from prison, he and Waterfield took a road trip where they raped and killed two teenage hitchhikers, later identified as Barbara Byer and Angelica LaValle from Orlando.
They would go out on hunting expeditions for girls. It was sort of like your mother always told you, don't hitchhike, and several of the people that they attacked were hitchhikers.
But where are the bodies? Gore leads detectives into the orange groves around Vero Beach. There, buried in two 55-gallon barrels, are the dismembered remains of the Ling women. In a later search, deputies find the skull of Judy K. Daly.
He decapitated her, buried her head in the orange grove, and took her body and threw it in the canal so the alligators could get it.
On March 6, 1984, David Gore faces trial for the murder of Lynn Elliott and the kidnapping and assault of her friend Reagan.
Reagan, from all accounts, was very, very brave. She's the one who survived, and she was the star witness in the case against both of them.
Throughout the proceedings, Gore shows little remorse.
Just sit there. No expression on his face. Hardly any expression. It's just like nothing affected him, you know?
He had the steeliest eyes. You know, you see these horror movies, you look at people's eyes where they look red and clear, and you can look all the way like to the back of their eyes, the back of the retina. That's the way he looked. He was the strangest looking guy I ever saw. He looked like he came right out of a horror movie.
After a short trial, David Gore is found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death.
When the verdict was read, I'm sure that the families, felt a sense of relief.
I felt great about that because he deserved the death penalty.
Gore also pleads guilty to the murders of Sheng Huang and Ying Hua Ling, Judy Daly, Barbara Byer, and Angelica LaValle, receiving a life sentence for each case. That same spring, Gore's cousin Fred Waterfield goes to trial.
He was concerned with putting on a show for the jury. I'm an innocent man that couldn't possibly have done this.
He maintained it was all David, even in the Lynn Elliott case where he was identified. He said that he was never a part of any plan.
Though Waterfield gets off with only a manslaughter conviction for his role in the abduction of Lynn and Reagan, the prosecution comes after him even harder in a second trial. Waterfield may deny taking the road trip with his cousin, but an eyewitness can place him near Orlando the day Barbara Byer and Angelica LaValle went missing. That, combined with Gore's testimony, sways the jury. On top of his 15 years for manslaughter, Waterfield is convicted on 2 separate counts of first-degree murder and gets 2 life sentences. Though Waterfield never admits guilt, there is little doubt that his twisted relationship with his cousin David Gore went back years.
David was the bumpkin and didn't get along with people and was kind of off to himself, quiet, wanted to be like Freddie, followed Freddie around. They had developed over the years of growing up and working together, of working a good guy and a bad guy routine. Fred's role in the cases was to be the good guy. He would help with the lure and the talk. Then David always endeared his role as being the enforcer. He was the bad guy, and he pulled the gun.
Had it not been for Lynn Elliott, the cousins' killing spree would have claimed many more lives.
Chances are they would have never, ever been caught, and had Lynn Elliott not run down that road and tried to get away.
She did her part. She ended the whole thing anyway. A hell of a way to go, but she ended the whole thing. She was a beautiful young girl and my only daughter. I'll just miss her the rest of my life. It never goes away.
You never get back what you've lost.
I love you, Lynn, and I miss you.
Today, Fred Waterfield remains behind bars, serving a double life sentence. A series of appeals has kept David Gore alive on death row for more than 2 decades.
Still stands as the worst case I've heard of in Florida, and one of the worst cases I'd ever heard of. All the horror stories that your parents tell you to try to keep you safe came true with just these 2 men.